Welcome into the Door Report. It is episode 185. It is a Thursday night, October the 13th. Something about those Thursday night previews, man. Powered by Alaco Fine Wood Floors. Family owned and operated for more than 2 decades. Alaco Fine Wood Floors is Nashville and Middle Tennessee's choice for premium quality hardwood floors. Since 1995, Jimmy Alaco and his army of employees have embodied the approach of taking pride in one's craft and providing superior customer service, growing from a one-man shop to a team of 23 professionals who share the founder's passion for quality craftsmanship and customer satisfaction. If you are interested in contacting them, you can find their headquarters at 2505 Winford Avenue over in Berry Hill, or give them a call at 615-356-0303, or log on to their website at alacofinewoodfloors.com. Alaco Fine Wood Floors, serving Middle Tennessee's hardwood flooring needs since 1995. Well, Vandy's got a trip down to Athens, Georgia coming up on Saturday. The number one team in the country. Yet another top 10 opponent for Vanderbilt. So, but I want to warn Vandy fans, this is the last team in the gauntlet. And this is the last TDR type of episode like this, where we're going to sit here and, we're gonna say it how it is, but we're also not. It's not going to be a beefy episode. It's not going to be an hour-long episode for good reason. But nonetheless, we will give you the prep for Georgia, players to watch on that side. We'll give you our 3 keys to the game, of course, predictions as always, and we check in with Palmer Thombs, good buddy. He's a Nashville native, covers Georgia for DawgsHQ, courtesy of On3 Sports. So, he was great, gave us a lot of good insight. Not that it's similar to Alabama, not that we don't, already know a lot about Georgia, but I don't know that we know as much about Georgia as we already did about Alabama. So this one is a little different than Alabama, but not really.
Take a deep breath, Vanderbilt fans. Just breathe in and breathe out. This is not the game against Georgia last season. Georgia is not the same on the defensive line. They are really, really, really talented on defense. They are really, really talented on offense. They are the number one team in the country. They are very talented everywhere, but they are not as good as last season. And I think that is a weird thing, is having a team that is undefeated sitting at 6-0. They've struggled at times, but they are undefeated with an experienced returning quarterback from a national championship team. And undeniably across the board, I think even Georgia fans would admit this is a step down from last season. Mm-hmm. That's just where you are. And that's a tough thing psychologically for a team to deal with. But I think it's funny you say the gauntlet is over. For Vanderbilt, it's always funny in the SEC the rest of the schedule is a cakewalk. There's only one top 25 team and a top 10 team, top 5 team left out of the remaining games. So it's easy from here. All you have is one top 25 opponent and one top 10 opponent remaining. So, easy sledding is
easy pickings from here on out.
Fun 8-game straight SEC schedule, which is just super
great
fun
timing.
/ unfortunate with how it goes this year.
It's like playing Wake Forest on a year like this. I mean, it's just unfortunate. Vandy, I could say and argue very well that they have the toughest schedule in the country. I'm not just saying that, because we've said that before the past couple of years, and it's also Vanderbilt. But
the only thing like in the analytics that I've found that's going to prevent that is the fact that they played Hawaii. That is going to, like, any of those that you look at, like if they would have just played a team that's like 90, but they played like one of the bottom 5 teams in the country. So I don't know if they're going to be vying for that top spot. But man, if you removed Hawaii from that calculation, just in conference, it's not even close. Vanderbilt has been bent over by SEC scheduling, and there's just no other way to put it. This team this year is just facing something that really you're not going to have to see for the next 3 to 5 years, more than likely. No, it's going to actually be a little bit of a step down. Now you're still in the SEC.
But I thought Palmer said it well. I mean, this is tough for anybody. And we've said this before. I mean, we said it when it started with Alabama. This is tough for anybody in the country. So, but we've got a lot coming up. Of course, full Georgia preview, players to watch. Gotta love the shirt there, Will. Before we get to breaking news, though, I keep saying breaking news, the Georgia preview. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at @door_report and Instagram, door.report. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our podcast is available on Anchor, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcast. And while you're at it, give our podcast 5 stars and a review on iTunes. All right, let's get to the Georgia preview. All right, well, let's talk about them dogs. The Georgia Bulldogs, but Vanderbilt heads down to Athens, not Athens High School, but Vanderbilt 3-3, will 0-2 in the conference as they travel to face number 1 Georgia, who is 6-0, the defending national champions. It's a 2:30 kick. I love the 2:30 kicks. There's nothing wrong with it. You have time to watch the 11 o'clock slate, and then you tune in at 2:30. So that'll be at Sanford Stadium. Will, a few nuggets here. This is Vanderbilt's first trip to Athens since 2018. So it has been just about 4 years since Vanderbilt's been down in Athens. Third straight top 10 opponent for Vanderbilt, facing 3 top 10 opponents for the first time since the AP poll was instituted in 1936, which is unbelievable. Will, I think you're going to like this. Saturday for Georgia, it's going to be homecoming. And Vandy has served as the opponent on this day 24 times for Georgia. Georgia's 20-4 against Vandy on homecoming, but in 2016, Vandy spoiled Georgia's homecoming. Of course, Zach Cunningham. Yep, Palmer Thombs actually mentioned his name at towards the end of the podcast, but they edged out the Bulldogs 17-16. Don't know how possible that is on Saturday, but some interesting. This series in the last 10 years is more interesting than people realize. I think even 10 to 15 years, Vanderbilt and Georgia have played some relatively competitive games. I mean, Vanderbilt, of course, beat them in 2016. They beat them in 2013. I know we're dating ourselves here, but that's in the last
decade, the last 10 years. I mean, I would argue there are not a ton of teams that have 3 wins against Georgia. I could be wrong.
I think you're right.
Vanderbilt has performed pretty well. It's one of the few matchups that I would say it's a pretty respectable actual win-loss record against the SEC opponent.
And even in, I think it was either 11 or 12, Franklin's first year, I think, Todd Grantham, of course, at the end of the game, that fiasco. Yeah. They almost beat Georgia that year. So obviously, like you said, Will, in the last decade or so, Vanderbilt has relatively competed with Georgia. Now there's not too many wins, but they have pulled out a few wins there. Will, kind of early thoughts. Obviously, this is very similar to the Vandy-Alabama matchup. Vandy's, of course, obviously overmatched in this game. I will say this, though, Will. I think Alabama deserves to be the number 1 team in the country right now. I'm not saying this means a whole lot with this Vanderbilt-Georgia matchup, but if Alabama and Georgia were to play right now, I think Alabama wins simply because they have the better quarterback. I think they have the better overall team. Now, that's not saying much with this matchup. And, you think Vanderbilt's going to compete against Georgia? No, that doesn't mean that. But, Will, I think Vanderbilt –
I also misquoted. I'm sorry, I misquoted. It's 2 wins. I said 3.
2 wins, okay. So you said 3, and I was like,
felt wrong. That felt wrong coming out of my mouth.
It felt way too good to be true.
I had to fact check it. So I haven't even been listening. I was just like, that didn't sound right. So I had to correct that as soon as possible. Sorry.
Yeah, that felt way too good to be true. But Will, I said early thoughts. Of course, we just saw what happened with Vanderbilt and Alabama. Is it any different? I mean, we're going to get into our predictions, but kind of how does Georgia compare to Alabama? I mean, I think they're very similar. And I think they are the 2 best teams in the country right now. But I think there are differences, when you look at Georgia, there are differences. There's a difference between Georgia's front 7 and Alabama's front 7. I think Alabama's is better. Now, does that come into play against Vanderbilt? Probably not. But, Will, what are kind of your early thoughts initially when you look at this matchup?
I mean, I think it's different than Alabama because it's not a rotational schedule. They're more human just because you're more familiar with them.
Right.
You've beat them more recently. I mean, that you've beat them in 2017 or 16, 17, whatever year that was. They're all running together now. I'm getting old. This 25 age is pretty tough. But you're more familiar. You know it's possible. I think last season, Georgia came in and embarrassed Vanderbilt. They've embarrassed them. It was embarrassing when they had to cancel the game. I don't know if there's as much motivation on the Georgia side really from that like there was last year. I don't know how much of that was just created on the outside versus the inside, but I think there's some more interesting things about this Georgia team. Not saying they're not one of the best 2 or 3 teams in the country. They definitely are. But this will be a good measuring stick. I think it's different than the Alabama game because you have a real comparison to last season. And last season, you mentioned it, or Brian mentioned it in his preview article, that game could have been 100-0 if Kirby Smart wanted it to. If Georgia wanted it to, it could have been 125-0. Vanderbilt would not have been able to get a first down against that Georgia defense, and Georgia looked like they could completely score at will. So this season is the real 120 on the golf course, the real 110, like what they did against Alabama. Like, the final score didn't look great against Ole Miss. That was obviously better than a 120 or 110 equivalent on a golf course, but that's what you want to do. You want to actually get beat 48-10. That's a lot more respectable. That's what Auburn just did, 42-10 last week. The goal isn't going to be spoken out loud in the locker room. The goal is always week in, week out. You're never going to have a coach be like in SEC college football and say, all right, guys, let's go compete to the best of our, like, these are guys on scholarship they view themselves and they are really, it's just a tiny little notch, some of the best athletes in all of college football. So, but the real goal is to cover the spread. And the real goal is to have Georgia playing their starters in the second half. I think is real. That would mean that you've competed for a full half against the number one team in the country. And if Stetson Bennett and the rest of them come out on offense in that second half, then I think you would deem this as a success, because I don't think anyone has any illusions of even the 1% of us going into the Ole Miss game like we had. It's a little different playing that number one, number two versus number 9. And the gap there is so massive between Alabama and Ole Miss. You saw it week 1 to week 2. That's the same thing. It's just the talent gap, just depth. It's different. Vanderbilt is not near as outmatched against Ole Miss as they are against Alabama and Georgia, but Georgia does have some holes this year. They're not this impenetrable force like they were last season on defense and in that front step.
Yeah, and that's what we'll do. We'll kind of talk about some of the weaknesses that Georgia does have, because they do have them. They're not as good as they were last year. Now they're still the number one team of the country, and because that was one of the best teams in history, at least defenses in history of college football. So, Will, let's talk a little bit about Georgia before we get to our keys to victory. Georgia leads the SEC in total yards, over 3,000 this year, 517 total yards per game. That's second in the SEC behind Tennessee. So the offense has gotten better after last season. They averaged nearly 40 points per game, and they're led by Stetson Bennett, who, Will, it's crazy. His numbers, 20-3 as a starter at Georgia, 1,700 passing yards this year. That's second in the SEC, 5 touchdowns, only 1 interception. So, I mean, he is taking care of the football. He does not turn the ball over. He's dropped down a little bit in terms of production the past couple weeks. But I think, we asked this to Palmer. Will, I think down the road here, if he plays up to his potential, he could insert himself into the Heisman, candidacy. Running backs, Will, they've got 3 guys. They've got a 3-headed monster at running back: Daijun Edwards, Kendall Milton, and Kenny McIntosh. I mean, their depth at running back, it's always good every year, but this year it's unbelievable. They've got 768 rushing yards combined between those 3 guys, 11 touchdowns. All 3 of them bring something different to the table. McIntosh is a great receiver out of the backfield, 250 receiving yards this year. But, Will, their best player, I think, is Brock Bowers. He's the best tight end in the country. He's going to be, I think, down the road, a phenomenal NFL receiver. I mean, the guy's a freak. They've also got a backup, that's unbelievable as well. So 378 receiving yards for Bowers, 2 touchdowns, but he is great in the running game, Will. I mean, he's got 3 rushing touchdowns on the season. I feel like every time I see a highlight of him, it's on an end around. 20, 30-yard gain on an end around. That's so dangerous with their power run game. At receiver, though, Will, their leading receiver is Ladd McConkey, 313 receiving yards and a touchdown. So they don't have the quote-unquote deep threats that they had last year. They had a guy like A.D. Mitchell last year. He's hurt this year. So Ladd McConkey, he's a good player. But, I don't know that they're as good at receiver as Alabama is. And Alabama's even slightly down. So that's kind of their offense. Their offense is a lot better than they were last year. They were good on offense last year, but this year there's an added dimension with that Brock Bowers running game, Stetson Bennett and his ability to get out of the pocket and run as well, Will. So this is similar to the Ole Miss matchup because, they want to run the football as well. You look at Georgia, that's what they're going to do. They're going to run the football, and then when they feel like it, they're going to run a play action and hit Brock Bowers. So that's the offense, Will. When you look at Stetson Bennett, though, he doesn't scare me as much as Bryce Young does. He doesn't. I mean, I know he's a really good player and he's going to execute He's going to execute when he needs to. But I think Vanderbilt, there's a smidgen of a path to potentially maybe disrupting Stetson back there because he's just not as good as Bryce. Now, their offensive line is unreal, so I don't expect that to happen. But I look at Georgia and I say to myself, this Georgia team is not as good as that Alabama team. Now, they may prove me wrong. They may do that, Will. And I'm not saying that leads me to believe Vanderbilt competes, but this team, point blank, is not as good as they were last year. But you look at their ranking, they're the number one team in the country. So that's
look, man. Stetson Bennett, I understand his stats are phenomenal. You can't discount being a quarterback and leading a team to a national championship. But you put Bryce Young on this Vanderbilt team. This Vanderbilt team wins more games this season. I'm thoroughly confident. You put Stetson Bennett on Vanderbilt or any other team in the country, they win probably the exact same number of games they otherwise would win, and his stats would not be anything close to what they are now.
He's kind of like
that is why he's not an NFL
at Alabama. Just kind of gets it done.
He's a game manager. I think he's a little bit more than that, but the main reason that Stetson Bennett doesn't scare me the same way as Bryce Young is just like what we always say. Okay, Stetson Bennett is achieving his peak ability of his athletic abilities right now. This is top end for him. Okay, that is a lot of what Vanderbilt's roster is. The rest of this Georgia roster, that is not the case. So anytime you have a player that is not a true NFL guy on Georgia's roster at any position, that's going to be the thing you point to as the weakness of the team. And that's what Stetson Bennett is. You had 15 guys drafted off that national championship team last season. And Stetson Bennett is not an NFL prospect this year. So you have to look at that as one of probably what is going to be included in keys to the game for probably one of us, I would imagine here, is disrupting Stetson Bennett. He's only 5'11". Vanderbilt has a lot of length, a lot of things that I think could disrupt him if they are able to get any type of pressure on Stetson Bennett and break down that pocket. Because like you mentioned, even if their O-line is down maybe a little bit, like was mentioned, and they've had a little bit of trouble at the line of scrimmage, this Georgia O-line is chock full of 5-stars, 4-star guys. I mean, and Vanderbilt has always struggled and continued to struggle this season getting pressure on the quarterback. So I don't think I necessarily expect it to really have an impact on the outcome of this game, because I think step one is going to be stopping this Georgia rushing attack that averaged 7.5 yards a carry last week against Auburn. So that's step one. But step two, if you can get past step one, which is a pretty damn large task to get past, would be getting pressure on the undersized quarterback that Georgia has. I mean, it just undeniably, he is undersized at that position, and Vanderbilt is kind of built to create problems with that.
Yeah, that's something to watch. We're not sitting here saying Vanderbilt's going to disrupt Stetson, look out. But there's an avenue for that. There's a pathway for that. It's like Ole Miss. I mean, if you can stop the run, then you force Jackson Dart to beat you. We're not saying it's going to happen, but there's a path for it. So that's something to watch with the Georgia offense, though, Will. Their defense, we've seen this year play really well, but we also saw them struggle against a Missouri team defensively. Now, Missouri, we thought, Will, heading into that, we talked about that Missouri-Georgia game. We said this is going to be a good kind of look ahead for Vanderbilt, how they match up. All of a sudden, Missouri looks like a really good team right now. So with this Georgia defense, Will, despite a record 15 players getting selected in the NFL draft, including 5 in the first round, which is unreal, they still rank as one of the country's best. They're 4th nationally in scoring defense at only 11 points per game. In 2021, they led the nation in scoring defense at 10 points per game as well. So, there's as much of a talent drop off in guys they lost last year. It's like Bama, even though it doesn't matter what they lost. It really doesn't. I mean, they reloaded. Yes, they're not as good defensively as they were last year, but I mean, they're still the number 1 scoring defense in the country. So, I mean, they're up there still. They're not nearly as good. I mean, no one's ever going to be as good as Georgia's defense was last year. But Will, something I look at with this Georgia defense, I was astonished by this stat. They only have
You're gonna
6.
Steal my stat. You're gonna steal my
They
stat.
only have 6
the
sacks.
one team ranking below Vanderbilt in sacks, and you
it's
stole
crazy.
it. That was my key one, Billy.
Let's just get to keys now. No, I'm kidding. Last in the SEC, though. So, Will, that's something to watch. I won't say much more on that. I know that's one of your keys. Hell, I think that's one of mine, too. So, Will, but a couple of guys to watch on their defense. Palmer mentioned this guy's name, Jamon Dumas Johnson. The kid's a sophomore. He didn't play his senior year of high school. I mean, these are the type of guys Georgia has that they insert and then, boom, they can compete and play well and dominate. So he leads the team with 29 tackles. He has 2 of those 6 sacks on the season. So I need to watch out for him at the linebacker spot. DB Malachi Starks, another younger player. He's second on the team in tackles, 25. He's got 2 interceptions. So, Will, they just get the job done. This whole Georgia team, they're like the old Bama teams. They just get the job done. They're not sexy. They're not crazy. They don't force a whole lot of turnovers, but they win games. It's like the Missouri game. I looked at that. That's the Georgia culture and program in a nutshell. So what? If you're down at half, so what? You're struggling. You're going to find a way to win. That's the Georgia culture right now. And credit to Kirby Smart and what he's built. I mean, he was at Alabama for 10 years. So that says a little bit about it there. But Will, you ready for keys? I know I just kind of stole your thunder there, but their defense though. Well, I mean, their defense is still that good. It's incredible. I look at it and it's like they're still statistically one of the best defenses in the country, even though you lose 15 players. I mean, Vandy has had, lost 2 or 3 guys to the NFL draft a few years, and then they're like 40 spots worse statistically. That's the difference between these two programs. And it hasn't always been that big of a drop off. That's kind of what Clark Lee is getting back to, Will. But yeah, Vanderbilt, Georgia, I think defensively, that's something, another slight thing to watch. Can they get pressure on AJ Swann? I would expect them to, but to what extent does that happen? So, well, let's get to 3 keys to the game though. And I know I just kind of mentioned yours. I actually, looking at my keys, I don't have that in there. So I'll let you talk all about those 6 Georgia sacks this year. But Will, I'll start for Vanderbilt. Will, they have had so much success in the red zone. I was about to say run game. They have in the run game, but in the red zone, it's crazy looking at their stats. They've scored on all 21 trips to the red zone this season. They've converted for touchdowns on 17 of those opportunities. And they're one of only 4 teams in the country to have come away with points in every red zone opportunity. And, you could argue 21 trips to the red zone. There's teams out there with way more than that, but that's still, I mean, it's not a bad number at all. I mean, with 17 touchdowns and 21 trips, that's 5th in the country in touchdown conversion percentage. And you've got Ohio State at number 1, Mississippi State at number 2, Maryland at number 3, Purdue at number 4, and Vandy at number 5. So, Will, there's little stats like that. Like last year, it was the interceptions. Just a ridiculous amount of interceptions. And you look at that stat and you're like, oh, they're pretty good defensively. But you look at deeper analytics and kind of the players they have, and, oh, it doesn't add up. So, I don't know that this really adds up in the win column, but I mean, your losses have come against 3 top 10 teams. So, Will, I look at it. This isn't just in this game. This is down the stretch of this season. You've got to continue the success in the red zone. I don't know that did Vanderbilt get in the red zone against Alabama? Maybe once on that field goal. Maybe.
I don't know if they crossed the 20. That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't think so. So that's okay. You don't get in the red zone against Bama. Let's try to see if we can do that against Georgia. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's possible, but that's kind of a reasonable bar, at least from a fan's perspective in this game. Let's get in the red zone, and let's score like you've done. I mean, Vanderbilt in the red zone, Will, one of the best teams in the country. And it's crazy looking at that stat, but in their wins, you go back and watch the highlights of those games and full game replays as we have this year, and you see the success in the red zone against Wake Forest. When they're in the red zone, they scored. And against Elon, they scored. Against Hawaii, of course. We know what they did against Hawaii. So, Will, in Northern Illinois as well, especially in that second half, they finished drives. Now, you could sit here and say they're not getting to the red zone at a clip that these other teams in the country are, but at the same time, you get in the red zone no matter how many times you do, and you're converting at that clip. It's really good. It's really good. So, Will, I don't know that they make it to the red zone. I love how that's what we're talking about. But if they do, Will, see if you can punch it in there against the Georgia team and put a touchdown on the board. Because I think that's kind of an added challenge. I'm not saying Clark Lee's sitting in a locker room telling his guys, hey, let's score a touchdown. But from a fan's perspective, I think you put a touchdown up on the board against Georgia, that's something to say, because I don't know that many teams will do that. I mean, Oregon didn't do it. Auburn barely did it. So I think for Vanderbilt, a reasonable bar in this game is put a touchdown on the board. Put a touchdown on the board. That means you get in the red zone and you convert. You keep that success going. And maybe that helps you continue it on the road against Missouri next week, and then South Carolina, and then Florida, Tennessee. So I think this game it's a nice little measuring stick before you get down the stretch of your SEC schedule and some more winnable games. You're able to play against a Georgia team and say, okay, here's where we are. So, Will, I love that red zone stat, and we haven't, I didn't mention it last week, but this week I said, okay, I got to mention this. So number one key to this game, Will, keep that success going in the red zone, because I think not only in this game, it'll help you be competitive, but down the stretch of this season, just keep it rolling, keep that momentum going, and see what you can do, see what can happen. So number one, Will, continue the success in the red zone.
I like that. And I'm going to go exactly as it is written here as I hold this up. And number one key, capitalize on opportunities. And that is going to be because of the one stat. I have some stats associated with each one of these, but Georgia is number 4 in the country in red zone opportunities per game. They are only giving up 1.8 trips inside 20 per game. That's better than the season before, which was 2.1. Now, some of that has to do with they haven't really gotten into the meat of their SEC schedule yet, so you'll see more that number slowly increase. But you mentioned that they need to convert once they get inside the red zone. That is 100% true, because this game and Vanderbilt covering the spread is going to be those 1 to 3, maybe 4 in a dream world. I know we're talking crazy, getting into the red zone 4 times. Yeah, just going insane. But punching in those opportunities and actually having an opportunity to have those opportunities. And I'll get to that in my key number 3. But key number 1 is going to be, once you get into those red zone trips are like gold. And especially as you get into SEC play and continue to go through SEC play and more winnable games, continuing what you have done. They're aggressive in the red zone. They haven't maintained that conversion percentage by accident. They've gone for it in situations that might have hurt that overall conversion percentage stat in the red zone, but it made sense at the time of the game. So don't be too conservative, just trying to put points up on the board. I like what they did against Alabama. Get that field goal up early. There's just something about having any number up on that scoreboard that would just be an improvement from last season. Because, man, Billy, I've sat through some tough games at Vanderbilt Stadium. And I'm going to say Vanderbilt Stadium because all of them have been prior to this season, the really toughest ones. But, man, it's hard to recall a really worse beatdown than what Georgia did to Vanderbilt last season. So this team definitely has motivation to come out and prove a thing or two that they are improved from last season. This is a direct measuring stick versus Alabama, which you're kind of like, yeah, we played them 5 years ago. You played this team last season, and the season before you had to cancel because you didn't have enough players. So if you want to talk about a step and just keep improving, is can't play because you don't have enough players and you have a female kicker. Fire coach improvement step, you field a team and you have a male kicker from Alabama. So that's big and improved. And then another step forward would be actually putting points up and having Georgia really have to compete, and maybe just giving that little bit of an instance of a flashback to that Missouri game they had before. And the kicker on this next step this season, he's gotten even more jacked. So you're like moving further.
He's
and
even
further
more of a man.
Yeah. It's like next time they're going to have like a lumberjack coming out with a full beard just to be like, this is not a female kicker. So, but yeah, key number 1, capitalize on opportunities. We're getting late. It's getting late. You can feel it deteriorating, baby.
Will, you lead me perfectly into my second key to this game for Vanderbilt. And how about that? We're all about transitions. Will, we all know what happened last year. It was a 62-0 demolition at your home stadium. And, I'm not saying we didn't expect that. because quite frankly, I think a lot of us did. I mean, that's kind of where that team was. But Will, there's a sense of this season, go out there and show that you're not in the cellar of the SEC. Go out there and show that you have taken that step. And, if you're Clark Lee, put up that score. Go to ESPN.com, print out that page, put up that 62-0 score on the bulletin board. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he's done this. I mean, Clark, he's about this type of bulletin board material, and he'll do anything to motivate his team. And I think that's what would be good for this team, to not harp on last year's game, but look at it and say, damn, that's not who we are. That's not who we are as a team. And that's not what we're going to be about in the future. That's not what Vanderbilt football is about. We're not 62 points worse than Georgia, and I don't, last year, maybe you were, but it's a new year this year. And you look at where you are as a program. This is an opportunity to take a step forward. Every game is another step forward you can take. And I know we go into these previews of Alabama or Georgia and we say, you know what, it's a wash, but no, I do think no matter who you play, there's a chance to take a step forward, improve, and get better as a team. So, Will, I think this is the second key is more about last year. And I know, nothing's about last year, but for this team this season, you look back, that's what the bar is. I mean, that's last year, that's what you've done. And as a fan, we look at that. So we'll take a look at that 62-0 score and use that as a little bit of motivation. Yeah, you're going on the road to play an SEC team, the number one team in the country, but you've also got a pretty damn good quarterback and, sitting there in shotgun, a good receiver in Will Shepherd, and a workhorse at running back. You can do some things offensively. You really can. If this offensive line holds up, like they did early in that Ole Miss game. Ole Miss is a top 10 team. And I know they're coming out of their bye week, but Will, this team, I'm not saying we are underestimating them. I think the rest of the country is underestimating this Vanderbilt team. I honestly believe that. I really do. And it took me a while. It took me a couple weeks after Hawaii. I was still, I don't know, it's Hawaii, but you still look at that Hawaii score and you say to yourself, they couldn't do that last year. So they've done enough this year to tell me, Will, they can go down and win an SEC game down the stretch, but this is a great barometer. So, Will, number 2 key for me is, let that last year's game motivate you. Let that take you down to Athens in front of a sellout crowd. I've heard there's going to be a bunch of red down there. And Will, just play your heart out and use that as motivation. So I thought you led perfectly into it. And that's why we've talked about motivation, Will. Clark Lee, his motivation job at least is not too hard this year. I mean, you can look at last year, Missouri, last time you played at Missouri, what happened? I mean, some pretty awful things and embarrassing things happen. If you're Clark Lee, you can point to that. So, and against Georgia, you can point to last year's game. So, Will, there's a lot of motivation. And like you said, this probably won't tie into how this game goes, but how this team looks on the field, effort, competition wise, and everything. Just use last year's motivation and take it to them and see what you can do in that regard. So use last year's game as some motivation.
You may have changed am I muted still?
No, you're good.
No. Okay, perfect. So you may have changed my key number 3. But I'm going to go ahead and stick with my key number 2 since I flashed the paper here. And I definitely want to get to this key number 2 because it's the stat that you spoiled. I was going to ask the question of who do you think is the only team in the SEC behind Vanderbilt?
Thought you could stump me.
Total sacks. And it's Georgia. They have 6 sacks on the season. Vanderbilt's coming in hot at number 13 with 7 sacks on the year. So dominant at the line of scrimmage. But that's a stat you can just point to and say, obviously this Georgia defensive line is a little bit down from last season. And that's a given because you probably had the best defensive line in the history of college football. I think I put it as the best defense in the history of college football, but college football historians will argue with that. So I'll just say best defensive line. So Vanderbilt always struggles against dominant pass rushers and defensive lines. That's not really Georgia's team this year. They are very, very, very talented. So they may come out and look dominant against Vanderbilt's offensive line. That happens a lot. A lot of times Vanderbilt can be the in-conference turning point for your struggling position. But I hope to not see that. So my key number 2 is to hold your own at the line of scrimmage. And that is also going to be because Georgia, even though this is all splitting hairs at this point, but Georgia's run defense is not quite what it was last season. They're giving up 3.8 yards per carry. That's only number 48 in the country. Last season in 2021, they were giving up 2.6 yards per carry on defense. So it's still a very talented defense. When I get to the other things that you list off, they're 6th in points per game in the country, yards per point, 6th in the country. So once you move the ball, they're not allowing you to score. So you're having to settle and not get into that red zone. So they bend but don't break this year. Yards per pass attempt is improved from last season. So their secondary seems to be slightly improved. Defensive line a little bit down. And then Palmer mentioned it that maybe that O-line has had a little bit of trouble. And some of that has had to do with Stetson Bennett playing through some injuries because that O-line struggling a little bit and getting banged up. So the line of scrimmage, while you may see Saturday that Georgia comes out and completely dominates, that would be the first indication of how this game is going to play out, is on those first couple drives. Is Vanderbilt able to create any sort of space or any sort of time for Swann to get rid of the ball? But number 1 is going to be, is Vanderbilt able to pick up that 3-yard gain? That's the main thing, because last season the line collapsed. 1 yard felt like 10. So you just didn't have Ray Davis just falling forward. He was injured. Right. He was injured. You didn't have that option. So this year, you have a semi-healthier backfield. Rocco's gone now, which hurts with depth. But the offensive line being able to just create those 2, 3, 4-yard gains and being able to not look at it after the game, look at the box score and say Vanderbilt averaged 1.7 yards per carry and Swann was sacked 3 times or 5 times or whatever you want to put the number at. So holding your own at the line of scrimmage can mean what you need it to mean in relation to your expectations. Whatever you want it to mean. Game. That is why I kept it very broad, because I don't think that there's a number. I don't think there's like Vanderbilt needs to rush for 3.5 yards per game and give up less than 4 sacks. I don't think that is necessarily what you look at, because there are going to be times that Georgia talent just overtakes that Vanderbilt offensive line and the lack of depth, and they get tired or out of position or whatever it is. But just 75, 80% of plays, whatever it is, just not getting absolutely dominated at the line of scrimmage. And that would be a big step forward from last year. That's not hate, that's motivation. Improve, just continue to take steps forward. Even with the losses that have covered the spread, even with those losses, continue to be more competitive. That's the thing. Every announcer, when a team is getting beaten badly, will talk about how, look at how these guys are going around and hitting for this new coach in his 2nd year or 3rd year. And like 90% of the time, it's absolute bullshit. Like, it's not true. Like, the players aren't just going to stop. Yeah, like, look, they're still playing football during the game. Like, these guys that don't normally get to play, these 2nd, 3rd strings, they're still tackling guys.
Look at this freshman that's going out there making plays.
This freshman that's trying to prove himself to the coaching staff that they're going to evaluate on film the exact same as they evaluate the first quarter. He's still going out and making plays and running the defense. But I think Vanderbilt really has that. I think you see guys in that Alabama game. Granted, there are times that human nature takes over and you don't maybe make that diving play or take on that 300-pound offensive lineman pulling from the guard spot around the corner. Maybe you don't take him on as aggressively when you're already down 35 points. But a lot of those guys were still hitting. Still hitting guys that maybe weren't the most fun to hit from Alabama. And I really, really mean that. And most of the time, I think that is bullshit. But I think Palmer mentioned it, the buy-in from the players. I think you trimmed off every bit of fat. I think every single player almost left on that roster has to be one of the personality types that just takes the scoff that people look at you every time you say you play at Vanderbilt. You take that look and that how everybody, I think the most disrespectful thing on the planet is how Vanderbilt's casually referred to. I think that is the most motivated. It's when people don't even realize they're doing it. It's when they're just like, oh, they're playing Vanderbilt, or you'll see a stat, or you'll see something, just a casual highlight. And you have to have a special group of guys that takes that as like a personal fuck you from like whoever is And like that's either a deterrent or that is the best motivation on the planet.
Yep.
Is somebody giving you that look or giving you that little snide comment, like not even a diss, like just you're not even worth a diss. You're not even worth me coming up with an insult.
Yeah.
And so I think that is motivation. It's just playing them close and not being a joke would be a huge step. And I think in their heart of hearts, the players think that way. So got a little off track.
I like it, Will.
Before
you lead me to this discussion because I love it. We talk about you got to have a special group of guys. You know, if you're at Alabama or Georgia, this was a special group of guys. Those James Franklin teams, that's 100% true. That was a special group of guys. Every team, his first team, special group. Literally. I mean, you had personalities like Javon Marshall, who just wanted to kill you on the football field. You had a receiver like Matthews. And I do think, that's what Clark-Lee's building. So I love that point, Will. And that's maybe an off-season podcast idea, but I love that. Will, number 3 for me is I didn't write it down. I just forgot it. Okay, here it is. It's getting late.
Well, number 3, the sky, and it came up. I just want to, if you're not watching the video, Billy just said, I just forgot it. Looked directly up at the ceiling with his eyes and then said, got it. Like, I don't know if he has stuff written up here.
I got it up here on the ceiling. That's where it is.
Something.
But
looking up in his brain.
Number 3, use your Vanderbilt degree and be smart. And I say that, Will, I haven't had this as a key. I thought about this right before the episode because you've got one of your most important games, one of your most winnable games coming up on the schedule next week at Missouri. Stay healthy, yes, but also stay out of trouble. We don't need a stupid targeting call that takes one of the defensive players out for a first half against Missouri. Or even, I don't know if they have full game suspensions anymore for anything, Will, but don't do anything like that would create something like that. And I say this only because next week's opponent is Missouri. And, you know, I was going to go the way of don't show Mizzou any wrinkles, but I hate saying that. But, Will, yes, stay healthy. I said that against Alabama. That was more comical than actually a legit key. But against Georgia, Will, don't do anything stupid like a targeting or anything like that. But also, offensively, give Missouri something on film where they go, we need to watch out. You know, not that they already know most of what they're prepping for with Vandy, but give them something against a team like Georgia to prep for. Give them a Ray Davis run that just knocks the defender's helmet off, or, you know, something like that. A Randy Moss, Will Shepherd catch. I mean, put a little bit more on film for Mizzou. I mean, let Coach Drinkwitz over there stay in the film room for a couple more hours on a Wednesday night, you know? And so I think, Will, as a coach, you know, we've never coached football before, but I think common sense comes into the discussion here. The last team you play, that's the best piece of film for coaches, really. Now you look at, you know, okay, this team is similar to us, so we're going to watch this game. But if you're Missouri, you're going to throw this Georgia game in and say, okay, we played this Georgia team. We almost beat them. How does Vanderbilt match up with them? So I think there's a lot of different things that you can look at if you're a Vanderbilt fan here. And no matter who you're playing, you know, I think fans, game day comes, you're always excited. But, you know, they're an East Division opponent, Will. You said it. I mean, that adds, I think, an added element. You know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, this is a more competitive game, but this is where Vanderbilt's at. Go out there and play and see what you got. So, but I look at it from the perspective of, we mentioned this Missouri game, Will, before the season started as the most winnable game. I don't know if it's still that for me. I would say South Carolina for me at this point, just because of what Missouri did against Georgia. But there's still, you know, I mean, South Carolina last week just beat Kentucky. So we've seen Carolina and Missouri play well and play higher than, you know, we thought they could even play against good teams. But I still think Vanderbilt can pick one of those teams off. I think those are the two teams to still do it. And it starts next week, Will. And I know you're not looking ahead, but fans look ahead. You look ahead to games, and next week is huge. This week is not. It's just not. Now, I want to get to the point where we're not saying that, Will. I want to get to the point where 2-3 years down the road, this is a Georgia game that we're talking about, and we're saying, okay, here's how Vanderbilt competes. But this week, Will, be smart. No targeting calls. Nothing that would hurt you next week. nothing stupid that would take a player out, or even cause an injury, something like that. I know a lot of injuries are unlucky, but don't do anything to even injure yourself. So, I'm not saying that's what Clark Lee's telling his guys, but, from a Vandy fan's perspective, show that you can go up there and battle with Georgia to Missouri, show that to Mizzou so that they, not saying scared, but, they have more things on film to worry about. I mean, I think that's something big. Will, I thought a lot about these keys. It was tough. I mean, it was tough against Alabama, but you got to change it up a little bit. You got to spice it up with these keys when you play a Georgia team like this. So, Will, put a few more things on film from Missouri, but also, be smart. Don't do anything stupid that would hurt you next week.
I like the key number 3 I've kind of developed throughout this better than what I
did the same.
So what I had written down, I stuck true to my number 1 and number 2. There's video evidence, but my number 3 was 3 plus 20-yard quote unquote explosive plays. And really what I was getting to was, so I've gone on the rant before, and I don't need to go on it again, about most, especially college football coaches, are like IQ level. They're high middle school gym teachers, and no offense to middle school gym teachers, thinking they're playing chess when they're actually playing checkers. So like what you want to know, they think they are playing chess. This is what I'm getting at. Is Clark Lee does not fall into that category. I think Clark Lee is very intelligent. I think he falls into the 5 to 10% of coaches I put in that other category. But so Missouri's coach, I don't put him in the 5 to 10% category. I've heard the man speak. He's not. And if he wants to challenge me, we can do a flashcard style, like situational football analysis of give me a time, give me a quarter, give me timeouts, give me opponent, give me score, and I guarantee you I will be able to break it down and evaluate it better than him. I'll bet my entire bank account and the entire Door Report bank account. Little do people know that's not that much fun. But getting back to what I was talking about.
Hey, we got to take small steps forward, Will.
Should small steps. All right. You're not going to grow to become 24/7 sport. Yeah, here we go. Yeah. And our first year was during the pandemic. So that was, or the end, whatever time period, the weird time period.
Yeah, whatever.
Dude, if I remember what my initial point was, this is going to be impressive. And I do. But it's utilizing Mike Wright. So I know Missouri's coach this entire time and any build up to that week, if Vanderbilt brings in Mike Wright and runs the normal packages like they did last week, is going to be preaching to his players that they are going to think about throwing the football, that he is going to be telling the corners and safeties, stay disciplined. But eventually they are going to take a shot with what was their starting quarterback that they were perfectly fine running the entire offense through. At some point, they're going to throw the ball with him out of this package that they have with Mike Wright, that they're going to slowly utilize more. I think throw the football this week.
Let it loose.
Mike Wright. Put it in their minds that, this isn't something they're saving a special play. They just have plays. He just comes out and you don't know what he's going to do. Right. And even if it doesn't work, if he throws 2 interceptions, that just adds another thing that Missouri and the staff and the players can't just focus on Vanderbilt's base offense with A.J. Swann and Will Shepard and Ray Davis and Pat Smith and Bresnahan and Schoenwald and McGowan. You can't focus on that because you're thinking about what plays are they going to be running when they bring in their mobile quarterback and they run this read option style that now has the flair of they're perfectly willing to come out and throw the football 50% of the time with him. I think that adds more of an advantage, is having now those additional plays on tape than not throwing the football and leaving that as a surprise. Because like I said, coaches like to think they're smart. They like to think that they've risen to the top because of their intelligence. And really all it is have you just hitched your wagon to the right guy on a successful, talented team? And have you been willing to work for $7,000 a year as a GA? And that's really it. That's how you become a coach. And I've seen it happen. It's not a diss. It takes a lot of work, a lot of time, but it's time and work. It's not intelligence. And that is why the cream rises to the top. And you see dynasties built and there's no parity in college football. That's not because of the schools providing more funding. There are plenty of schools that pay a lot of money and still suck. It's because of coaching. So
Hinted
Clark
at
Lee, you
Auburn.
said Vanderbilt degree for the players, be smart and don't get injured. Clark, you have one of those. You're a smart guy. I have faith that a competent game plan will be created by the staff on offense that will leave plenty on tape for Missouri to evaluate.
Yeah, and Will, you mentioned hitch your wagon to the right guy. How about AJ Swann is the guy you're hitching your wagon to if you're Clark Lee? That's not too bad. And that's pretty damn smart, too. I mean, it's starting to come together. Will, I know we're previewing Georgia, but and even quicker than we thought. I mean, let's face it. Like, we're sitting here previewing Georgia and we're this positive. I mean,
I think we're more keeping it positive. I think the season can turn drastically. I think that the beginning of this year, and we are giving leeway at 3-4, the last 5 games of this season, there will be a lot more criticism than you have heard throughout, because this season will be made or destroyed if they come out and they get absolutely shellacked 4 out of the last 5 games and compete in one of the games against their remaining SEC opponents. I mean, we're going to be looking at saying this at the end of the year. So I think that there are signs, but it's still a show me. To me, it is still a show me thing. You've shown me a little bit by beating the teams you were supposed to beat. Now show me that you can come out and beat a team that maybe individually is more talented than you. Maybe one of these upcoming SEC opponents. Show me. I've seen that there's been a baby step, but is there a big step that's happened this year? You'll find that out.
Isn't Missouri the show me state? Well, I think it is, or is it? Am I wrong?
Maybe.
Okay, interesting timing there with Vandy playing Mizzou next week. But Will, I'll say this: on paper, other than Tennessee, every game left in your schedule, and maybe Kentucky, but I don't think Kentucky is necessarily at Tennessee's level. Other than Tennessee and maybe Kentucky,
that is Missouri. I'm impressed.
Okay, there you go. But other than Tennessee and maybe Kentucky, Will, those every other game, at least from my perspective, is winnable. And I think to even be saying that right now, and talk is cheap, yada, yada, yada. But I think that's just where we're at. And I am with you, though, Will. I think we've agreed on surprisingly everything, I feel like, this year. I mean, other than maybe Mike Wright, AJ early on, I mean, we've agreed on pretty much everything. So I'm with you in that. But I didn't expect to be sitting here at 3-3 at this point in the season. Before, in our preview pod, I said, I think they can get to 3 wins, but I also don't like that prediction of mine. I didn't like it, but they go down on the road and beat NIU, and so that's where we're at, Will. But Vandy-Georgia coming up, we've got predictions. Well, we've got to get to predictions. I'll start. Well, let's face it, Georgia will dominate this game. I think we both agree on that. It's going to be very similar to Alabama. I picked Vandy to barely cover against Alabama. I'm sick of picking Vandy to cover. Every time I pick Vandy to cover, it fails miserably. I'm not making that mistake again this week. I think Georgia rolls at home. Final score, Georgia 48, Vandy 3. I don't think Vandy gets on the board. I don't want to believe that, but Georgia's defense is as advertised, and they're just as good as Alabama, maybe slightly worse, but we're splitting hairs there. So it's going to be tough for Vandy, Will, to establish anything offensively. And on Georgia's offense, I mean, they're better than they were last year, which is scary. I mean, Brock Bowers is another year older. They've got another freak show tight end. The guy, Darnell Washington's like 6'7", 280 pounds. I mean, it's ridiculous. The freaks they've got a 3-headed monster at running back. So this is the old Alabama. It really is. Alabama's a new modern style version of themselves. This Georgia program, Kirby Smart has just built the next Alabama. And Saban, I'm not saying he's declining, but let's face it, he'll probably retire here in the next couple years. So Kirby Smart was smart in going to Georgia and developing what Saban did at Alabama. So Will, I don't see Vandy coming remotely close to stopping Georgia's offense. They'll be able to do what they want. Maybe it's a game, Will, if there's a glimmer of hope, maybe Georgia just starts off not great, kind of a sleepwalk like Ole Miss did last year. I don't see this happening, but if there's a glimmer of hope, I think maybe that's your opportunity. But then again, we thought Alabama was sleepwalking at first, and they were up 14-0, after the first quarter, I'm almost positive. So, well, it's just, it's hard to evaluate games like this. It's hard to preview games like this. But at the end of the day, there is still a goal out there for Vanderbilt. As I talked about, put a touchdown on the board. Prove me wrong and put a touchdown. Lose 48-10 instead of 48-3. Yeah, from the nation's perspective, you're splitting hairs. Like, oh, Vandy got destroyed. We can't respect them yet. But from your fans' perspective, I think, just make it somewhat respectable. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think Georgia dominates Will 48-3. So that's my pick, and I'm sticking to it.
This has been a tough one, honestly.
Really?
So, yeah, because
in terms of covering,
in terms of just, you said splitting hairs, but we all know there's a massive difference sometimes in some victories that are like 52-21. There are huge differences in those games when they're 45-3 going into the fourth quarter and late. The opponent kind of, makes it look better at the end versus a real score like you had against Ole Miss last week, which is that was a real 52-28. That was real. So Georgia, when you look on paper, the reason Alabama, I think, we expected the offense to do a little more, maybe. I don't know. I don't even remember what we predicted for Alabama, honestly. But I know
I picked Vandy to cover. I think it was 45-10. And it failed miserably. So Alabama do that again.
Yeah, they make their money in the passing game, especially when Bryce Young is healthy. Pass rush, linebacker. Georgia's the opposite. They've got a running game, tight ends. They've got a really good secondary with a very talented defensive line, but not necessarily with the best production so far this season, and very talented linebackers, but same. With some individual guys that have performed really, really well, but as a unit. And then this offense from Georgia, they like to run the ball, and they're very good at it. But what did you even see against Ole Miss that Vanderbilt struggled with so much? It was still the big plays through the passing game and guys getting behind Vanderbilt. That's not really what Georgia's going to do with 5'11" Stetson Bennett, former walk-on at quarterback, because he can't throw the ball that far and see over the offensive line and make through the multiple
Georgia's banged up
easily.
at receiver.
Yes, and you don't have the explosive playmakers on the outside. And I'm hating on Stetson Bennett a lot just because I have to pick on somebody. And he already has a national championship, so he has plenty of confidence. But I just I have to pick somebody.
He's very easy.
Also older. It's like I like to pick somebody that's like really close to my age too. So it's like I'm not going to pick on like an 18, 19-year-old freshman. I'll pick on Stetson Bennett. Like he's got his hairline's
the delivery. What do they call him? The mailman?
Yeah. Dude. But
so.
Did you give us run game? No, I haven't gotten there yet, Billy. You keep commenting and getting me going and fired up late. But
all right, I'll shut up.
White Claw, I see it. Yeah, maybe we'll get sponsored. But Georgia is going to milk the clock. They have a bye week coming up. They're not known for explosive plays, and they don't have a good pass rush. I don't think we've hit on that enough. They only have 6 sacks on the whole year. That is Vanderbilt's number one Achilles heel. Is any team that has a very, very good pass rush is just forget about it. So Georgia's run defense a little bit lesser, and their pass rush definitely big time down from last year. But their secondary's improved. So I like Vanderbilt to keep this one a little closer. I think that early Georgia's going to have some drives that are just dominant, but I think with the team that's run first, as long as Vanderbilt can prevent the explosive downfield passes, that is what has killed them. Giving up 1 or 2 big runs just doesn't have the same feel to it of like, oh shit, here we go again. So I've bounced around a few points, but in the end, you're splitting hairs. I'm going to go Georgia 45, Vanderbilt 13.
Okay, 13 points on the board for the Doors down in
Athens. I think that they can hit one play in the run game or the Mike Wright package. I think if they can hit one big explosive play, I think they'll be able to move it a little bit more consistently, get into Bulldogs range, that 20 to 35 yard marker on the Georgia side of the field. That's going to be the gold spot for Vanderbilt to make my prediction happen.
So Joe Bulldogs, he could be your MVP in that cover for Vanderbilt, Will. So, but Mike Wright package, that's something we haven't talked about a whole lot, Will.
Mike Wright's package.
We haven't had to, though. I mean, last week we said, yeah, we could see it. But I think this week even more, maybe you want to give AJ a little bit of a break against Georgia's defense. But, then again, he played the entire Alabama game. So, I think that's something to watch if you're a Vandy fan looking. I don't know how long you're going to stay watching this game, but I think that's something to watch. You could see a little bit of Mike Wright in that Mike Wright rushing package. So I thought they used it great against Ole Miss too, Will. Perfect times in the game. So there's our predictions. I don't have Vandy covering. Will does. So one of us will be right and one of us will be wrong. That'll be fun.
Eternal optimist here on the podcast.
We've got something to watch now, Will. We've got something to keep an eye on in this game as we do every week. But Will, let's get to Palmer Thombs. He covers Georgia for DawgsHQ, courtesy of On3 Sports. He's a Nashville native, so he actually went to Montgomery Bell Academy. So same high school as Clark Lee. So he respects Vanderbilt. He knows what Clark Lee's trying to build. So I thought that was more of a unique perspective, Will, from a writer like him. But he also talked about some of Georgia's weaknesses and kind of Stetson Bennett's path to where he is now. So, Will, I thought it was interesting catching up with Palmer, and he gave us kind of a glance in it this season. He talked about the first 3 games dominant and then the Missouri game, Will. So I thought this was a great discussion.
Yeah, spoil of riches, I would say. I mean, just how spoiled Georgia fans are when you go on the message boards, the things they complain about.
At the beginning, I was like, I bet you're busy. He said, yeah, I'm so busy, man. I was like, at least you get to see some wins here. I mean, you're covering Georgia, man.
Yeah. And he was talking about like whatever they haven't lost since, or they won the national championship, and these other podcasts are taking credit, or his podcast was taking credit. And I was like, we can't really say that because we haven't seen an SEC win since we started this podcast, and we've had 185 episodes. So man, dude, I think we have to pull out all the stops whenever it does happen, dude.
Honestly,
I mean, we are in rare. It is almost. Well,
here's what we're doing. At this point. After the first Vandy win, if it's this year, we're doing it in person and we're picking out our favorite whiskey. And we're celebrating. I mean, we have to. I think we plan this out. We will have a special episode when it happens, and we will have to go through every SEC game that has happened since. And just go through real quick and run down the list of every game and just have our memories since the most recent win all the way to that one. And that'll be our first in person with a bottle of liquor, and we'll get to evaluate all the fun times that have been had. I already feel bad for the team we beat because I mean we're gonna clown them, but also I mean
you'll see Vanderbilt Twitter out in a way that I don't think me and you even know exists.
And it's going to be the best. It's going to be the best form of Vandy Twitter, the cynical, comedy from Vandy Twitter about, when they win an SEC game, yeah, it's going to be a lot of jokes, but Vandy Twitter is going to come out and they're going to have
people make fun of Vandy Twitter. I'm like, you are poking a sleeping giant because Vanderbilt has kind of a very small little Twitter accounts that tweet about him, but it's really good stuff if you get nestled into content. It. And it's a little bit bigger than I think you realize that the reach of the Vanderbilt Twitter, but all of this has been built with literally nothing outside of, baseball, but none of the main stuff in men's basketball and football. They've all sucked. You've given Vanderbilt fans nothing to work with. Like, we have nothing, dude. Like, it is tough getting into the arguments because, like, literally any football historical thing
where you don't have anything else.
I don't have any. Like, I am really good at spinning facts and spinning things and taking time periods.
But even you get to a point where
I get to a point that I'm like, yeah, dude, for like, you're better. just in general, like it all comes down to that.
I'm sick of this.
Every statistical thing you can name for the past 50 years, every single SEC program has been better in almost every sport outside of baseball and men's golf and women's bowling. So like, you've given us nothing to work with. So watch the fuck out when Vanderbilt Twitter gets any type of success I'm excited, in the Clark Lee area. It's going to be a dangerous time for other SEC fan bases out there. The wittiness and darkness within us. I think you just can't fake it, and we have it like no one else.
I think Vandy fans will connect uniquely to Clark Lee, unlike Bobby Johnson did, unlike Franklin did, unlike Mason. Now, Franklin connected, but Clark Lee, I think, to a deeper emotional level for a lot of Vandy people because he went through that. He went through hell with Bobby Johnson, and now he's back coaching. So that's another discussion point.
Well, also Bobby picked up a pretty tough. Bobby Johnson recruited in a lot of the guys.
I don't know about
Matthew
hell, but
I think that this is what is like 90s was this giant down, just
very
plummet.
slow.
And then Johnson built this
He built
nice
the foundation
brick by brick.
Franklin.
He built this foundation, pulling them out of the depths of hell. And then Franklin booted up. When Franklin left, he sent him back a little bit, and then Mason built him back up a little bit.
So Clark Lee's doing the same thing that Bobby Johnson did.
Except Clark is trying and appears to be doing it at a lot faster pace and with a lot more, not just this is a good, this is Bobby Johnson. He seemed like a great man. I don't know. I was young. Who knows? But he's just a good old boy. And like you send your son here, he's going to play football for an honest program.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm not saying Clark Lee's not honest, but like there were no illusions that Bobby Johnson was going to like completely change the face of Vanderbilt football. And I think Clark Lee, you have that potential with, and it doesn't just mean figuratively. You are literally since he has been there and Candace Story Lee has been there, you've changed the logo. You've changed the name of the field. So like everything is changing.
Stadium.
So it's not just building the base. You're doing, the whole stadium. You're doing everything at once. So I think there's this connection of like, he knew what he was getting into going here. And I think that there was an understanding of having former student athletes really being involved at Vanderbilt and understanding what it's so unique because Nashville's not a college town. And that is the part that is 95%, 98, 99% of Power 5 teams, even the ones that are not powers, they're still the main show in town. Even no matter what,
the only show in town.
Kind of nothing. Yeah, they're the only show in town. That's everywhere. Even like Tennessee, like they are Knoxville. Like if you took Tennessee out, like Knoxville sucks. Like it's a piece of shit. Like everybody knows it. And so like Nashville's not that way. Like Vanderbilt's just another thing. There are like 5 universities, 6 universities on top of everything else in Nashville. So that's just so unique is the focus of where you're located. The local radio, it's not all built around you because there's an NFL team, there's a AAA baseball team, there's an MLS team, there's 5 other college programs going on around here, and you're in the state of Tennessee, surrounded right in the middle of the SEC, where you have this conglomeration of fans.
Melting pot. Yep.
You're battling so many different things, and I think that there's just this feeling for the first time that even if it doesn't work out, there's like steps in the direction that the people that know what are going on or know what's been going on, like steps are being taken in the right path.
Yeah.
And in the past, it just felt like the administration was, just being hired out of an executive search firm somewhere by the university and just like plug and play. And you've been an AD here, now come be an AD here. And like we've said it, coaching any Vanderbilt sport, it's a unique challenge because you face unique issues being the only private university and by far the most competitive athletic conference in the country. So that's the end of my rant. We said it wasn't going to be beefy, but here we are, Billy.
Here we are. But the building blocks are there. That's what we're here to say, Will. And all that to say that our next guest, Palmer Thombs, is a guy from Nashville. He understands the challenge at Vanderbilt, and he's covering Georgia. So, I think that's a little bit of the difference with Palmer as he is coming up next here on the Door Report to preview Vanderbilt and Georgia coming up, 2:30 p.m. Central Time kick on the SEC Network in Athens, Georgia. You've been listening to episode 185 of the Door Report. Stay tuned for Palmer Thombs coming right up. Welcome back into the Door Report alongside Will Byram. I'm Billy Derrick, and we roll through our episode 185 here, the Georgia preview as Vanderbilt travels down to Athens on Saturday. Palmer Thombs joins us now. He covers Georgia for DawgsHQ, courtesy of On3 Sports. Palmer, before we start with Georgia, I know you guys are somewhat new over there at On3, and of course you've been covering Georgia, I think, ever since you've been a student there early on. What's that kind of transition been like for you guys? And I know you're on the Georgia beat, so I mean it's always busy.
Yeah, we were talking about that before we started recording. It's always busy, but it's been really fun. We've got a bunch of sites across the network for On3. Started up in August of 2021. That's when the Georgia site launched, and was one of the first 3 And, we kind of like to take a little bit of credit for breaking Georgia's championship drought. Georgia has never not won a championship with DawgsHQ around. So, we like to take a little bit of credit. We've got a Tennessee site taking a lot of credit right now. They're new. So they're saying, Tennessee's undefeated as long as we've been with On3. So, it's been really fun. Made the transition over from 24/7 Sports to On3 last year, finished out, graduated, and sticking around Athens to keep covering the Dogs. It's been a really good time.
Well, you're welcome.
Billy, I didn't want to interrupt that point that he was making, but I don't think we should be judging podcasts and how good they are based on that, because since we started this, Vanderbilt hasn't won an SEC football game. So I think it goes the opposite direction with us. We have not yet recapped an SEC win. So I don't know if we'll get into the keys in this interview here to Vanderbilt accomplishing that against #1 Georgia. But
you know what? We're canceling the door report because we feel like that's going to give Andy a chance this Saturday.
Yeah, that's actually what this whole episode is about. Here we go.
No, but that's true. That's true what Will just said, though. So maybe this season, we'll see. But Palmer, let's get into Georgia. They, after dominating the first 3 games of the season, they quote unquote struggled a little bit against both Kent State and Missouri. Missouri, that was a battle a few weeks ago, but they seemed to regain their footing last week after dominating really a reeling Auburn team with their coach. I mean, who knows when he'll be fired, but how would you describe Georgia's season so far, kind of in a nutshell, the first half of this season?
Yeah, it's kind of a problem that they've created themselves. All this build up, all this hype around this team was magnified, amplified when they went and beat a, at the time I think they were number 11 Oregon team, just outside the top 10 there, and just absolutely dominated them 49-3. In a quote unquote neutral site game. It was in Atlanta. Absolutely more Georgia fans there than Oregon folks, but great environment. And obviously we've gone on to see what Oregon has done since then. They are the top ranked 1-loss team. So by that standard, Georgia with the best win in the country. Like you said, the narrative out there has been that they've struggled the last couple of weeks. A big win at South Carolina. But that's not a team that's been all that. Obviously, the Gamecocks go on the road to beat Kentucky, and so that win looks a little bit better. Beating Kent State looks a lot better because of just the skill set that they've played. But Georgia has been a double-digit favorite, it's 17+ point favorite in every game so far this season. That's not changing this week, and so I think a lot of fans look at the perception out there is that they should go out there and they should win these games. They should cover each of these games. They should win them by, 20, 30, 40 points. And that's just not going to happen, especially in the SEC, especially when you go on the road, especially when you've got such a young football team like Georgia does, losing 15 players to the NFL draft. They are still finding their footing. That certainly was the case against Kent State. They turned the ball over 3 or 4 times in that one. You're going to play closer games when you do that. And they still won that one by 17. They turned the ball over twice at Missouri. You get off to a slow start on the road, you're going to find yourself in a 4-quarter battle. And that's exactly what happened. But, to me, ultimately, winning is what has mattered for Georgia. The fact that they are 6-0. And like you said, felt like they got things back on track a little bit against Auburn. Not the best first quarter. It was tied 0-0. Not the best first half. Stetson Bennett threw for 25 yards, and they were only up 14-0. But to turn it around in the second half, to go on to win 42-10, they found their run game. That's been a problem for them. They answered some questions, and Stetson played a little bit better in that second half too. I believe he threw for, it was like 15 of 19 for 200 something yards, just under 200 yards. Certainly a turnaround of a second half that Georgia fans are hoping can carry into Vanderbilt and on down the road.
Yeah, Palmer, thanks for joining, by the way. And you mentioned that the narrative, and I like that. So I actually had that written down as the narrative coming out of last season. Georgia, obviously, pretty successful season, I think, by any metric. and probably the best defense, arguably, in the history of college football. I've seen a lot of beatdowns. I've seen a lot of good SEC football teams having season tickets for Vanderbilt over the years since like 2005. And 2019 LSU's offense with Joe Burrow and that defense last year with Georgia, those are the two that stick out in my mind as by far the best sides of the ball on both. So what has it been like transitioning with a narrative kind of hanging over in national media? Not that Georgia's a bad football team, just that they're not as good as last year. But you're comparing to maybe the arguably best defense in the history of college football. So how has this team been able to create its own identity and kind of overcome that obstacle?
Yeah, that's been a question that
attempt to.
That's been a question that Kirby's been asked quite a few times this week, being that we are at the halfway point of the season, of the regular season, that is. And what is the identity of this team? How does that compare? He's not big on comparisons, but he did say, the identity of this team is one that is just gritty. They like going out there. They like practicing. Not that last year's team didn't, but this year's team needs it because they are so young. You look at the guys that are out there, we talk specifically about the defense here. You look at the guys that are out there, they are replacing 8 guys that were picked in the NFL draft, 5 first rounders. It's a lot of guys that were not major contributors last year. They might have contributed in some way, shape, or form, especially with the way that Georgia was able to get up and get the starters out of there. These guys did get experience, but they didn't get the experience of going out there and being relied on and being a starter and relied on every single down, every single day. So they've certainly had to grow up. I think that the last couple of weeks have been a growing process. It would not surprise me to see this team continue to be, ride that roller coaster of emotions. They're going to play up, they're going to play down, they're going to play up, they're going to play down. And that's just what's going to happen with a young team. But like you said, they are incredibly talented. I mean, the way that Kirby has stacked top recruiting classes on top of, top recruiting classes, you look at this defense and who's out there, it's still 4 and 5 stars. It's still incredibly talented players. I mean, you've got a freshman starting at safety, but he's a 5-star top 10 player in the country in Malachi Starks. Georgia had a player win freshman of the year last year, and Starks has a strong chance to win it again this year. He's the team leader in interceptions, team leader in pass breakups, second on the team in tackles. First on the team in tackles is Jamon Dumas Johnson, who's just a sophomore, did not play his senior year of high school football. That was canceled in Maryland due to COVID. And so he's continuing to grow. He didn't play a ton last year because he was behind 3 guys that are now in the NFL. Same thing with Smile Munden, who's third on the team in tackles. Those 2 guys have grown up into big leadership roles. They've established themselves, and then it doesn't hurt to have really good players around them, guys that were really good players last year. I mean, Jalen Carter is a potential top 10, top 5 pick in the NFL draft. Obviously, he's been banged up here a little bit, probably not going to play on Saturday, but having him doesn't hurt. Christopher Smith is a guy that has started for 2-3 seasons now. That doesn't hurt. Keely Ringo, Nolan Smith, those guys were 5 stars, number 1 players at their position. Nolan Smith was the number 1 player in the country in 2019. So to have guys like those guys along with the guys that are growing, we're seeing a Georgia product on defense that is not that big of a drop off from last year. They're probably a little bit less consistent, but they are certainly just as talented.
So that's the defense. Let's go to the offense, and they're led by a quarterback in Stetson Bennett, who before this season, I mean, this guy just won a national title, and I mean, his story is a movie. It's ridiculous, and he still has people doubting him heading into this season. And yeah, you could argue reasonably so that he was led by that defense, but he's proven the doubters wrong this year. I mean, his stats are ridiculous. Only 1 interception. I mean, he's taken care of the football. So, Palmer, so far this season, how would you evaluate Stetson Bennett's play? And do you believe, I know this was talked about after the first few weeks, but do you believe he has a case to maybe be considered a Heisman Trophy contender kind of down the stretch of this season?
He's got to step it up if that's going to be the case, because there's obviously a lot of really talented players around the country, and he hasn't played his best football the last couple of weeks. This Georgia offense hasn't played their best football the last couple of weeks. But if he is able to return to the form that he had those first 3 weeks. I mean, accounting for multiple touchdowns in all of those games, certainly could be a Heisman contender. He's got the story that everybody loves, and he's going to have a stage to do it on. As you look ahead on Georgia's schedule, obviously Kirby wouldn't do this, but if you look ahead, they've got a huge rivalry game against Florida. That's always going to draw eyes. Tennessee is in November. That November stretch that they have of Tennessee, at Mississippi State, at Kentucky, is incredibly tough, and that is 3 of the last 4 games of the season. So he's going to be on stages where, if he performs like he did in the first half of the season, you'll certainly see his name there. Right now, I don't think you're going to see his name there, and that is because of that up and down nature of Stetson's play. We talked about the young guys being up and down. Well, Stetson has been a little bit up and down too, and I think some of that has to do with this Georgia offense has been beat up. Top pass catcher, top wide receiver, not top pass catcher, but top wide receiver A.D. Mitchell is out right now. He's been battling injuries since first series of the second game. So Georgia hasn't had him since Oregon. They didn't need him against South Carolina because they had a guy like Brock Bowers, and they've found other ways to win. But Stetson certainly can improve. He's probably a little bit banged up, Kirby told us. And if you watch the game on CBS this past week, they were talking about Stetson being a little bit banged up, dealing with a shoulder issue. It's not something that's going to keep him out, but it's something that he is certainly on his mind. He's got to stay on the sideline, stay warm, stay throwing the football. So that's probably affected him a little bit. And not having some of those top pass catchers, certainly hasn't helped either.
So I was going to ask a pretty basic question of where are some areas of concern on defense and on offense, but I think I'm going to flip it on its head. So are there any areas on this Georgia team that you would say are improved from an undefeated national championship run last season?
That's a scary question.
That's a tough one. It's not one you prep for.
No, it's not. And I would say the tight ends, which is really scary. Like you said, Billy, when you had a guy like Brock Bowers last year go win SEC Freshman of the Year, go win National Freshman of the Year, I think that he's gotten better. I think that Stetson has gotten better. Stetson is certainly a lot more comfortable. And like I said, he hasn't played his best football, but he's certainly capable of more this season. I think that those first couple of games, you really saw what Stetson was capable of. So I would say Stetson has improved. He's very comfortable in this offense now. He's got a lot of veteran playmakers around him. He's got an offensive coordinator in Todd Monken that understands him, that understands his strengths, his weaknesses. Georgia doesn't want to put the ball in the air 40 times with Stetson Bennett. They don't want to throw it too far downfield. They'd rather, when you've got playmakers like Kenny McIntosh in the backfield, Brock Bowers, at the line of scrimmage, Lab McConkey is a guy it's incredibly shifty. You want to get the ball to those guys as quickly as possible and let them make plays. And as I mentioned, those tight ends and the improvement that they've made, Darnell Washington is so much better this year.
What a freak he is.
And he is a freak. Both those tight ends are freaks. To see a guy that's that big, 6'7", 270 is what he's listed at, but I think he's probably closer to 280, 275, 280. And to see him get up in the air like he has, I mean, he's hurdled, feels like countless defenders every time he touches the ball. That's scary. And so as Stetson has gotten comfortable, as these playmakers around him have gotten comfortable, that they are certainly finding ways to use those guys. But I will answer your original question there, where Georgia, might want to improve, and on both sides of the ball. I mean, I think that it's the play at the line of scrimmage. The offensive line has not been has not been at its best. They had their best game this past week, so maybe they've turned it around, but they certainly didn't play all that great against Kent State. They certainly didn't play well for the first 3 quarters of that Missouri game. Now they turned it around in the fourth quarter and rushed for 100 yards, and then they turn it around against Auburn. They carry that momentum with them and rush for nearly 300. There. So has that turned? Maybe. I think that this Georgia team needs to get healthier, and that's not something that you can necessarily do while you're continuing to play games. It doesn't necessarily pertain to this game, but the bye week comes at the perfect time for Georgia with those games that are after, like I said, Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Kentucky. Georgia's got to be healthy if they want to play at their best, their fullest potential in those games, and they've got to get healthy here. So I think that Kirby would love nothing more than to get up and get the starters out of this game and then get them more rest during the bye week. But obviously you've still got a football game to play before you can even start to think about resting up and preparing for that tough stretch.
Obviously, Palmer, last year's Vanderbilt-Georgia game was a demolition derby at Vanderbilt Stadium. I mean, it was no contest from the very beginning. And Vanderbilt fans, I think, are sitting here wondering, will it be any different this year? I mean, we'll see. But I want to go back to the Auburn team that Georgia saw last week. After seeing that game, how do you compare that Auburn team as opposed to this Vanderbilt team? Because right now, I mean, we've seen Vanderbilt ahead of Auburn in several different power rankings in the SEC. So, I mean, is this matchup that much different, or do you think, Vanderbilt has, somewhat of a path of making it closer or more competitive than Auburn did last week?
To me, I think the biggest difference between those two teams is, and Billy, you mentioned this in the Q&A that we ran over on DawgsHQ, the buy-in that Clark Lee has from this Vanderbilt team. I don't know that Brian Harsin has that right now at Auburn. So, you're seeing a team at Auburn that's struggling. You're seeing a Vanderbilt team that's growing. I mean, to win 3 games, to surpass your expected season win total as early as they did, and it's been mentioned before, but their 3 losses have come to top 15 teams. They've played back-to-back top 10 teams, and they're going to play another one this week. So it's really hard. That'd be hard on anybody, but it's especially hard on a program that is trying to turn things around like Vanderbilt is. And so, I think the buy-in that Clark Lee has is certainly a plus for Vanderbilt in this game. I would probably say Auburn's talent was a little bit better. But you've got both teams have young quarterbacks. Both teams have playmakers on both sides of the ball. Those playmakers have just got to be a little bit better than Georgia's playmakers, and they've got to shine. I mean, they've got to shine. I think of a guy like Anthony Orji there. He's got to shine on defense like Zach Cunningham did in 2016. If Vanderbilt wants to have a chance, on offense, you've got to have playmakers. Somebody has to be a standout, whether that's AJ Swann, Will Shepherd, somebody else, one of those running backs that's continuing to grow in that running back room. Somebody has to shine on both sides of the ball for Vanderbilt if they're going to make this one closer, because there's no doubt Georgia has a talent advantage. Georgia had a talent advantage over Auburn. It was probably a little bit smaller of a talent advantage over Auburn, but not all that smaller. But the buy-in advantage, Vanderbilt definitely has that over Auburn.
Well, that's how you know he's a Nashville guy, paying Clark Lee and Vanderbilt the respect they deserve. Salute to you, Palmer.
Appreciate that. Salute.
I love it. Hey, let's get to your prediction here. Of course, Vanderbilt traveling to Athens. That is a 2:30 Central kick on the SEC Network. Well, he's not a color analyst, so we can get his prediction. We started the year off with a couple color analysts on the team's radio network, so we weren't able to get their pick. But Palmer, let's hear it for Saturday, Georgia and Vandy.
So I haven't thought about it all too much, a specific score. But I do know, and we'll dive into staff predictions over at DawgsHQ tomorrow. I know the line is 38.5 last I checked. At least that's what the line that we're picking it against. And man, I didn't think Georgia would cover against Auburn last week. I just think that they're not consistent enough of a football team to pick them to cover those big spreads. And the Auburn spread was much smaller than this one. So Georgia has not covered a 30+ point spread this year. And I'll say that one continues. I think they're probably going to win by like 35. But 38.5 is a lot of points. You really got to win this game by 40+. And I just, again, I mentioned it earlier. Georgia has the bye week after this. They would love nothing more than to get up and get out their guys. And you know, it comes on those second team guys to tack on to keep that up. I think that they win, and they win big. I'll probably say, let's say Georgia 41, Vanderbilt 6.
Okay, there it is from Palmer, giving it right to us. The pick for this Saturday's Georgia Vandy game. I don't think there's as much motivation to run up the score as there was last year. There's a little bit of motivation last year. Georgia's fine. There's no extra motivation this time around. Palmer, really appreciate you joining us here, and good luck your coverage this weekend in Athens.
Of course, man.